This married couple rushed to the hospital because the woman was in labor. And when they got there, the doctor said, I've invented a new machine that you might want to try. It takes some of the labor pains away from the woman and gives these pains to the father. Well, so the married couple decided that, they would try this new machine. The doctor hooked the machine up and immediately turned it on to 10% of the pain switched from the mother to the father. And the husband said, I feel okay. I feel pretty good. Why don't you turn it up a lot more? And so the doctor turned it up to 50%. And the husband said, well, you know what? Why don't you just put it all on me because I don't feel a thing. This is great. There's nothing. There's no pain. And the doctor warned him. He said, if I turn it up this much, it really could kill you. It really could. If you're not prepared. And the husband replied, I'm ready. Just do it. And so the doctor turned the machine up to 100% of the pain for the husband rather than the wife. But again, the husband didn't feel anything. So they went home happy because they had a pain-free labor. But when they got home, they were shocked to find that the mailman was dead on the front porch. Now, I don't mean to disparage nothing about mail personnel at all. But since today is Pentecost, the birthday of the church, it really is interesting to me to read this passage out of the book of Romans, out of Paul's letter to the Romans. He says this about labor pains. He says, we know that the whole creation has been groaning in labor pains until now. Well, what's happening here? Well, in this passage, Paul is expanding the notion of salvation to include all of creation. Now, unfortunately, no matter how much we read Paul here, or we read books on creation spirituality or something like that, Christians have a very difficult time understanding salvation as anything other than something for the human individual. But for Paul, salvation, whatever that is for all of creation. So you might say that God practices, in a sense, trickle-down theory, because you and I benefit from God's desire to bring redemption, wholeness, shalom, and salvation to all of God's creation. But then Paul kind of narrows the focus on us. Paul says, and not only the creation, but we ourselves, who have the first fruits of the Spirit, groan inwardly while we wait for adoption, the redemption of our bodies. For in hope we are saved. Now, next week, I'm going to talk about adoption as a metaphor for the church that was born out of the Jesus movement and the church that continues to be born and reborn today. But I love this image of labor pains applied to God's desire to bring redemption and salvation to all of God's creation. In Romans chapter 8, which by the way is one of my favorite chapters in the entire Bible, in this chapter the whole universe is depicted as a woman in labor giving birth to new life. The universe is like a woman in labor giving birth to new life. In other words, it's a painful process. How many of you ladies have given birth? Is there any way for you to describe to the rest of us how much pain you experience? Now, we'll just assume it hurts. We don't really need you to tell us. But we'll just assume that it didn't really feel good. Well, this is how we need to understand the birth of the church at Pentecost. It had to have been a painful experience. Look at it this way. With 20/20 hindsight, we can say that the Jewish faith gave birth to the Christian faith. And I think reluctantly so. Now, Jesus, of course, was born a Jew. And then when he grew up, he began a movement that both lovingly embraced his Jewish faith, but also felt the need to separate. And at some point, the cord was cut. The Christian child felt it had to separate itself from the umbilical cord of its Jewish mother. And it was a very painful experience because the first followers of Jesus were all Jewish. They had Jewish families and friends. But as so often happens, when a religious visionary such as Jesus begins a movement, the movement eventually becomes separated from what gave it birth. I think the Gospel of Luke hints at this pain of separation when he records Jesus as saying, "From now on, 5 in one household will be divided. 3 against 2 and 2 against 3. They will be divided. Father against son, and son against father. Mother against daughter, and daughter against mother. Mother-in-law against daughter-in-law, and daughter-in-law against mother-in-law." How often do we see this scenario played out in our own extended families, where divisions exist between, let's say, conservatives and liberals, or UK and U of L fans, all in the same family, right? Or worst of all, those who drink sweet tea and those who drink unsweet tea. That's the worst. Inevitably, these disagreements will lead to separation, a cutting of the cord. But the gospel writers, now, who may have been a little bit biased, they believed that was all for the better. Mark's gospel has Jesus saying this, "Truly I tell you, there is no one who has left house or brothers or sisters or mother or father or children or fields for my sake and for the sake of the good news, who will not receive 100-fold now in this age." So, according to these guys, this is a good thing that this separation took place. But more than likely, the split between the mother religion, Judaism, and the daughter religion, Christianity, was something that Jesus himself would not have even considered. I believe, as many biblical scholars also believe, that Jesus had no intention of birthing a new religion. He simply wanted to reform the religion of his birth. Nevertheless, disagreements between Jesus' early followers and the Jewish leaders, as well as the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD, and the spreading of Christianity all throughout the Gentile world, eventually brought about a permanent separation between Christianity and Judaism. It would be hard to put us back together. It'd be nice to try, but it'd be difficult. So to use the birth analogy, Judaism went through severe labor pains to give birth to the church, to Christianity. But while Jesus himself did not experience a painful separation from his people, unless of course you count his execution, he does compare his newly emerging spiritual awareness with being what? Born again. Think about that. Born again. And I believe he used that image of being born again to suggest that a spiritual awakening can and should be a painful experience. There's nothing easy about it. And I don't want to sound too brutal, but if your own spiritual journey has not included a few uncomfortable contractions along the birth canal, then maybe the spiritual journey still lies ahead of you. Now, of course, every once in a while we hear about easy births, easy ones. A week after my oldest daughter was born, my cousin's wife, Becky, gave birth to a little baby boy named Jeremy. And the birth happened while she was being carted down the room to the delivery room. She was in her room, and then they were on the way to the delivery room is when she gave birth. Apparently, she said, Jeremy just popped out. This was her third child, and she said, well, there's nothing to it. He just popped out. But even if it was that easy, that is an exception to the rule, I think. But I don't think the birth of the church was simply a matter of popping out. Nevertheless, here we are on another Pentecost Sunday, what we refer to as the birth of the church. And actually, it would be more accurate to say that this day should be called the birth of the Holy Spirit. As Peter says in his address to the crowd on that first day of Pentecost, this is what was spoken through the prophet Joel. In the last days it will be, God declares, that I will pour out my Spirit upon all flesh. Now that's pour out, not pop out. Now, without being too graphic, can't you almost imagine God giving birth to the Spirit? Just as Mary gave birth to Jesus, just as the Jewish religion gave birth to Christianity, just as the Catholic Church gave birth to Anglicanism and then the many branches of Protestantism, and just as congregations today give birth to new churches each and every day. And sometimes these new churches are planned, right? I mean, we could refer to a new church start program as Planned Parenthood, although I think that term has already been used. But in this case, a good, healthy congregation is called by God to plant a new church start and give it all the love and support and nurture it needs to help it grow. And then sometimes a dying congregation is called to give birth to something totally new. Last Sunday, some of us attended the celebration of ministry at Salem United Church of Christ, which is over on Newburgh Road. Today is their very last service after 147 years. I mean, think about it. Ironically, they are having their last service on the birthday of the church. So imagine the pain of doing so after 147 years of ministry. But it's not just the death of Salem United Church of Christ. It is the birth of something new. Because the building has been turned over to Brookline. And they have, from what I understand, great plans to use the facility and even add on to the facility. But to the few remaining worshipers at Salem, today must feel like labor pains. All of their labor over the years is about to give birth to another child. Literally a ministry for children. But even in the midst of their joy, there must be a great deal of pain, labor pain. And so sometimes these things are planned, but other times they're not. Just like some pregnancies, right? And this might occur, for example, when a group of discontented members of one church break away and they start a new church. And I thought about that, and I thought, well, maybe we could refer to conflict resolution in the midst of church conflict as birth control. But we won't do that. So, my question today is, where are the labor pains of new birth occurring in the church today? I believe they are everywhere. Although we tend to see more evidence of churches coming to the end of their life cycles, there are signs of new birth and new life in many different places and in many different ways. Let me offer one specific example, one that we will be exploring in the next few weeks, all throughout the month of June. There are some folks who believe that we are currently in the labor pains of a new reformation in Christianity. Think about that. A new reformation. Some 500 years after the last Reformation. Think about what that means. And oftentimes when there's talk of the new Reformation, there is also talk of what has been called the emerging or the emergent church. To help us understand that term, think about the word emergent, which generally refers to something arising unexpectedly. So a small sapling growing in the midst of tall trees in a forest is sometimes called an emergent. And so the tree that we have sitting up here on the chancel, and it'll be there for the next few weeks, represents what is emerging or arising unexpectedly in the church today with the help of the Holy Spirit, which is hovering around the branches, right? So whether you are a proponent of the emerging church or not, and we'll talk about that and you'll get a better sense of what that means. The word emerging seems to me to be an accurate description of what is taking place today in some expressions of the Christian faith. There almost seems to be a sense of something new, something almost infant in the air. To use an analogy Jesus used, new wine is being poured into old wineskins. And at times, though, new wine is being poured into new wineskins. The wineskins sometimes are being replaced. So something is emerging, but that word might not do justice to the pain that is being felt. When we describe the birth of a baby, we don't usually use the word emerging, do we? Any more than we just say the baby popped out. We usually don't say that. Because that which is new rarely, if ever, comes along quickly or easily within Christianity. That which is new is almost always accompanied by a lot of fear and trepidation. It is a painful experience. So what I want to do is take a few minutes and have a brief conversation. I'm going to come down on the floor with you, turn my mic on. And this is something that we will be doing today and all throughout the month of June. And I want to begin with these questions, these particular questions. Do you believe that we are in the labor pains of a new Reformation? A new Reformation? And if so, what does it look like? And are we, that is the United Church of Christ, and in general, or St. Andrew in particular, are we part of this new Reformation? So let me come down and just talk to you.